I genuinely love football. Honestly, like this past few weeks of football have really shown me that this sport, I love this sport. Of course, you've had the AFCON, which has been incredible from start to finish. The quality of the tournament has been really, really improved this year. Of course, Nigeria is coming up against Algeria in the next few days. I will be making a video on that, win or lose, as well as the Spanish and French Super Cups, which were played out today, and an incredible barrage of Premier League fixtures throughout the entire festive period that ended today with Arsenal drawing 0-0 with Liverpool. Ultimately, it has just been some really good football on our screens. Like, irrespective of who you support, which team you like, which team you don't like, it's been some great football on display. And you want to start probably with Arsenal versus Liverpool. And I think with Arsenal versus Liverpool, we saw the game, of course, with everything that happened before the game, with it being the last game of the game week per se. We knew that Arsenal had all the pressure on them to win this game. It wasn't a must win, but it was a game that I think if Arsenal did go on to win would be a huge statement in the title race. In the first half, I thought Arsenal were much the better side. I think they created chance after chance, and you really saw all the great elements of this Arsenal side. The quick interplay, Martin Odegaard getting on the ball and creating chances, Saka and Trossard being direct on both sides of the flanks. But as you see with Arsenal typically, Victor Gyökeres having little to no impact in the game, pretty much being anonymous, as we've seen for many games. I think he's only scored one open play goal in the last 12 games. And then you saw that lack of clinical edge by Arsenal in the second half, because in the second half, Liverpool took complete control of the game. I think in that second half, Liverpool were the much better side. I think if they had a player like Hugo Ekitike or Alexander Isak today, I think Liverpool could have probably snatched a victory today. I'm not saying as though Liverpool were the much better side throughout the 90 minutes or Liverpool deserved to leave Emirates Stadium with a victory or with the 3 points. But I think in that second half, it really looked like an Arsenal side that were more scared to lose the game rather than just go out there and just play and win the game. Because ultimately, even if Arsenal went out there and lost the game today, which they didn't end up doing, you're still 5 points clear and you still have a 2-game swing on Manchester City. And I still think Arsenal are going to win the league regardless, whether it's a 5-point swing at this point, a 6-point swing, or an 8-point swing, which they would have wanted it to be. And tonight, I thought players like Jeremy Frimpong was fantastic, even though I personally am not a huge fan of him as a player. I think he's very one-dimensional, but he offered a huge outball for Liverpool in the attack this game. Cody Gakpo wasn't really lively, so you needed a player like Frimpong to be that outball for them in the attack. I thought the midfielders were fantastic in that second half in particular. Dominic Szoboszlai really took ownership in the midfield, along with Gravenberch as well as McAllister. I also felt like a player like Florian Wirtz, who's come under a lot of criticism, he did not hide in this game. A game where you have a player like Declan Rice, a player like Zubimendi, who's been so good in his own right. I think a player like Florian Wirtz really came out to play. He didn't hide behind any challenges. I think Liverpool were really good in their second ball retention. All around, as I said, it wasn't the perfect performance because they didn't have any real threat going forward in the final third, but I think in the first phase and the second phase of the game, I think Liverpool were top. Once again, you have to ask the question around Arsenal in these sort of games. I've mentioned it before. I think Arsenal in these sort of games, when they're playing against the teams who are probably their biggest rivals, whether that be Liverpool, Chelsea, or Manchester City, I think these teams can give them a game. But in a 38-game league season, I still think Arsenal are comfortably the best team in this league, whether that be depth, quality, and just efficiency. So ultimately, I still think Arsenal will win the league. But I look at a game like this today again, a big game at home where it felt like you needed to make a huge statement to the rest of the league and to Manchester City. Where is Bukayo Saka? I'm not going to talk too much about it because I've talked about this multiple times before. Where is Bukayo Saka in these sort of games? If you want to win league titles, and ultimately Arsenal probably don't even need to win these sort of games to win the league title this year. They could probably still go to the Etihad Stadium and draw and still win the league title. And that would be 4 games against two of their biggest title contenders, Man City and Liverpool, home and away, and they probably will win none of them, but they'll probably still win the league comfortably. All in all, probably doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's just a question that I have. And of course, the only reason that this game, the Arsenal-Liverpool game, had so much riding on it was because of Manchester City's draw against Brighton 1-1, in a game that you once again saw the huge deficiencies in this Manchester City side that I mentioned, and the reason why I said Arsenal are continuing going to be my favorites to win the league title. The ceiling and the floor of this team are way too far away from each other. These last 3 games that I mentioned it in my video on Manchester City. I felt as though if they get through these 4 games, whether that be Sunderland, Nottingham Forest, Chelsea, and Brighton, if they get through that unscathed, then they're real title contenders. But as you've seen it, they've gone on to draw 3 of their last 4 games, dropped 6 points, and have basically handed the title to Arsenal, in my opinion. In this game, lack of a clinical edge in the attack was not flowing as it has in previous games. And of course, add on to that the injuries to both Ruben Diaz and Josko Vardio. For me, the title seems very, very far away from Manchester City this year. Brighton, as usual, continue. As I always tell you guys, Brighton are that team in the league. If you are not set up completely well, if you are not going into the game with the right game plan, Brighton will pick you apart. And they continue to be the most consistent, inconsistent side in the league. And if we're talking about inconsistent sides, we need to talk about Tottenham Hotspur and Thomas Frank, who continue to look like a lost cause. Genuinely, this guy looks like a dead man walking every single game. Lost to a Bournemouth team who have not won a game in 12 games. 12 games. They haven't won a game. And of course, it's Tottenham who give them that result. Typical Spurs. Of course, Antoine Semenyo scores the winning goal. A game that was really back and forth, really expansive as you'd expect from any Bournemouth game. And of course, Antoine Semenyo now looks like he's set to go to Manchester City, leaves with that winning goal in the last minute to basically give them the 3 points in a must-win game. In a game that I think, genuinely, if Bournemouth were going to get any sort of momentum going into the second half of the season, they needed to win that game against a Spurs side that are literally begging teams to beat them every single week. And of course, the side that Thomas Frank did leave is Brentford, and they came out 3-0 victors against Sunderland. And honestly, people have been talking about Igor Thiago, and we'll come on to talk about him, but I think Keith Andrews deserves a lot of respect. I think Brentford as a football club deserve a lot of respect because coming into this season, a lot of people probably expected them to be in that relegation area of the table where you have players like Christian Norgard leaving the club, Brian Mbeumo, Johan Visa, 3 players who have been crucial to the success they had last season. 39 Premier League goals combined between those 2 strikers, as well as your club captain leaving the club. It was always going to be expected for most people that Brentford would probably be one of the main teams that would go down this year. Add on to that, you're hiring a manager who has little to no experience. But I think this season, you've just seen that Keith Andrews, of course, they had a really rough patch at the start of the season. But ever since then, they've been flying. Igor Thiago, I believe it's 15 goals in the Premier League now. The guy looks like a proper number 9, whether it be near post goals, headers, flick-ons, interchange play with Kevin Schade, who's been really, really good in that second striker position. Brentford just continue to be Brentford. Difficult to beat. Hard to play against, intense, good at set pieces, which is what you'd expect when you hire a set piece coach as your manager. We keep it in London, and Fulham came out 2-1 victors against Chelsea, and Chelsea continued to be a very confusing side for me. Of course, this game, they didn't have Liam Rossinier, who was watching on from the stands. Callum McFarlane continued to take the interim charge, and it looked like a team who didn't really have a manager. Of course, the red card definitely hindered their progress in this game. If I'm actually giving Chelsea the benefit of the doubt, I thought they were actually pretty decent in this game, considering the fact they played majority of it with 10 men. I think they were able to hold Fulham at bay for a long time, and I think they created a few chances of their own. There was a period in the game where I generally felt like Chelsea could have gone ahead in the game, but as I always say, when you have the sort of defense that Chelsea have with Adarabioyo, with the likes of Gusto, with the likes of Chalobah, you're not going to get very far. And in this game, ultimately, Marco Silva outcoached Callum McFarlane, which is to be expected. And Fulham continued their decent form. Another solid mid-table side. Honestly, the Premier League is filled with teams where I always say if you are not set up well enough, if you are not at your best, they may seem like mid-table fodder that, okay, these are easy 3 points, but they will take advantage of you. And Callum Wilson. Harry Wilson continues his great moment in this time, scores his 7th goal in the Premier League this season. He's doing wonders for them this season. Raul Jimenez continues to show that he's a reliable striker, irrespective of that terrible injury he suffered at Wolves. So Fulham continued their good form. Chelsea continued their bad form. Liam Rossinier is going to have a huge job ahead of him. And with that Carabao Cup against Arsenal coming up, it might get spooky. But one quick shout out, or I don't even know if this is a shout out, but quick touch on Cole Palmer, who has, of course, just came back from injury. I don't even know if we can still say Kate just came back. He came back about almost 2 months ago now. But just came back from injury about just under 2 months ago, 6 weeks or so ago. And he looks like a player who's really lost right now. I don't really know what Cole Palmer is at this moment in time. Of course, he had a few flashes as you'd expect from a top player, but he just doesn't look like the player we saw a few seasons ago. Even last year, towards the end of last season, he didn't look like the player that we saw in that 23-24 season. So it'll be interesting to see how Liam Rossinier employs him in the future. But if Chelsea want to have any hope of succeeding in this season, they're going to need Cole Palmer to get back to his very best. Continuing on the inconsistency route, and Manchester United played out 2-2 draw with Burnley. And there wasn't really much to take from this game. Burnley continued to be one of the worst teams in the league. Manchester United continued to also be one of the worst teams in the league. And one thing that I found very interesting about this game, and actually very interesting about my Man United video in total, there were a lot of people in my comment section talking about how Manchester United and how Ruben Amorim was wrongfully sacked, or Ruben Amorim should have been given more time, or Ruben Amorim was a scapegoat in the whole procedure. I partially agree with those things. I don't think Ruben Amorim is the only reason Manchester United are in the situation that they're in. But anybody who genuinely believes that Ruben Amorim should have stayed as the Manchester United manager clearly should stop watching football. This guy had a 30% win rate at his time at the club. They lost 19 games. 19 games. There were fans watching this game against Burnley, And Man United did not even play that well. And they were salivating. It's like if you've been eating salads, protein shakes, tuna sandwiches for a whole long time, a bowl of ramen is gonna seem like gourmet food. I saw Man United fans drooling at this performance with 19th place Burnley. Like, if anybody genuinely believes Ruben Amorim was the right manager for Manchester United, I'm sorry. You need to stop watching football. You genuinely need to stop watching football. You can have the argument that the owners are also to blame. That's perfectly fine. But if you genuinely look at this manager and you look at the team and say, oh yes, Ruben Amorim, he's the right manager. Why did they sign? Like, some of the people I'm seeing online are talking about Ruben Amorim like he won them a Premier League title and he's misunderstood. The guy lost 19 games in 40 games in the Premier League. He had more losses than I don't understand. I don't understand it. Newcastle and Leeds played out a thriller of a game as Newcastle once again escaped through the skin of their teeth. This Newcastle side, they don't look convincing this season at all. The side they came up against, Leeds, I've been very impressed with them. This is their first defeat in the last 8 games, a run in which they've played Liverpool twice. They played against Chelsea. They played against Manchester United. They just barely lost to Manchester City few weeks prior to that unbeaten run starting. So for me, Daniel Farke has really started to understand how his team works. I think the start of the season, you saw them play a bit more expansive, but I think he's really realized this is a side that really, the fundamentals of this team are the physicality. And it's important that you kind of rest on those strengths, because if you try and play to their weaknesses, you're not going to get the best out of them. They've picked up a lot of points in their last few games. I think they've picked up about 14 points in their last few games, and they've just gone farther and farther away from the relegation battle. And I think at this point, Leeds are probably not going to be in the relegation battle, because you look at the teams that are in that relegation battle and they look absolutely horrible. Quick shout out to Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Brandon Aronson, particularly to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who after he left Everton, I think a lot of people would have believed that this guy's career is over. And I was one of those people. Of course, we saw that brilliant form he had about 5-6 years ago now in COVID period with Everton under Carlo Ancelotti. That feels like a far distant memory, my goodness. But now you're starting to see the best of Calvert-Lewin again. I think he scored his 9th goal in the Premier League this season. And if you're going to survive in the Premier League, you're going to need a gunsman. You're going to need a player up front who's giving you 10 to 12 goals. And that's exactly what DCL is doing. Continuing on the relegation bandwagon, Matheus Mane continues to shine for this Wolves side that just look completely and utterly doomed. They look destined for relegation. But hey, Rob Edwards might be doing something. Is it ridiculous to say there's a great escape happening? Is it ridiculous to say? Because I watch Wolves, and even before Rob Edwards came in, even before they started winning games or not losing games, let me say that, I look at the performances and I'm moved. Look, I'm moved because it's not even as though Wolves are going to these games and they're getting pumped. You know, it's a whole different situation if you're playing these games and you're losing 4-5-0 every single game. But they're going to Anfield. They're going to the Emirates. They're playing at home against Man United. I know they lost 4-1 to Man United, but I watched that game. That was not a 4-1 game. Like, Wolves are not that bad. They'll definitely eclipse the whole Derby County worst ever Premier League season of all time, but will they get out of relegation? It looks very difficult because with Nottingham Forest beating West Ham in a game that I unfortunately watched as well, that was a terrible game of football. Quick shout out to Nuno Espirito Santo. Pour one out for my guy. Guy got sacked from Nottingham Forest after losing to West Ham, and now he looks on the brink of getting sacked after losing to Forest. Now, Marinakis has completely and utterly screwed this guy over. It's a real shame because I think he's a pretty decent manager, and he's just made to look a fool in these past few months. Of course, Villa dropped points again. Selhurst Park is always a difficult place to go, but as I kept on saying it, these guys are not title level. They are just your typical Champions League position challenging side. They're not going to go that far in the title race. They're going to wither away eventually. Quick shout out to Jordan Pickford. I think he was fantastic in that game between Wolves and Everton. He was the only reason Wolves actually did not win the game. Once Everton went down to 9 men or 10 men and then 9 men after the Jack Grealish red card, I think he just continues to be a great servant for Everton, both for Everton and for England. I think when you talk about the best goalkeepers in world football, he doesn't get mentioned. And I don't think he should be mentioned, but I think he's shown a pretty decent level for a very long time, for about the last 8 years now. 8-9 years, going on 9 years. So huge credit to Jordan Pickford. I think he's the captain at Everton. David Moyes. Of course, it's a tough draw for Everton, and it's kind of spooky home form for them this season. That Hill Dickinson Stadium is not giving the same aura as Goodison Park, but as you'd expect, it's a new stadium. Teams are going to come there with a bit more confidence, knowing that the stadium isn't as tight. It's a bigger atmosphere. They're going to feel a bit more riled up to play in that sort of stadium. So, of course, it's expected. But as we mentioned before, the relegation atmosphere right now is kind of bleak. Wolves probably look destined to go down. Nottingham Forest are also just as bad as West Ham. And as I mentioned before, Burnley are absolutely horrible. So it'll be interesting to see. But enough about the Premier League football. Paris Saint-Germain beats Marseille on penalties in a game that I watched, and it ended 2-2 in regulation. And to be very honest with you, this game, I continue to look at Roberto De Zerbi, and I continue to say, why are you the way that you are? Because he sets his team up in such a way that is so expansive and so kamikaze and so ridiculous, but it works. And when it works, it's exciting. And when it works, you reap the benefits. But then when it doesn't work, you look at it and you think, why are you like this? And you watch this game, for example, and he takes off some of his key players in the final moments of the game. His team is so open. I mean, you're in the final few moments of the game. Even the first goal they conceded to Dembele was just clown, like circus defending. Genuinely circus defending. The goal they conceded to Gonzalo Ramos in the 95th minute. It is the 95th minute. Why is your team that all over the place? Like, I really don't understand Roberto De Zerbi as a manager. He will get you good results. He will get you playing a good style of play. He's going to fall out with a few players. He's going to fall out with a few board members. But at the end of the day, the guy's not going to win anything with this team. Paris Saint-Germain continue to be the best team in France, and they will continue to be the best team in France. I mean, with the amount of money they have, you're not going to really expect anything to change there. But it was kind of a shame. I watched that game kind of trying to see how good at Paris Saint-Germain. Of course, they looked really, really formidable in this game. But Marseille looked just as good. And I think Marseille probably should have won this game. If I'm being completely honest with you guys, I think Marseille should have won this game. But as I said, when you're playing that expansive against a team that are as clinical as Paris Saint-Germain, you are not going to win the game. And once it got to penalties, I didn't even bother watching it. I knew Paris Saint-Germain were going to win the game. And then a quick last shout out, and the most important shout out to the Spanish Super Cup, which is being played in Saudi Arabia. I prefer not to speak. Barcelona defeated Athletic Bilbao 5-0. Pretty comfortable stuff. Quick shout out to Athletic Bilbao for continuing to take these beatings from us time after time after time. I think that football club has gone completely stale. They need to sack Ernesto Valverde today, yesterday, last week. They need to get him gone. Iñaki and Nico Williams, I hope they're enjoying this. I hope they enjoy their trophyless season, because Nico Williams, he rejected us for a second summer in a row. Am I spiteful? Am I, still annoyed? Am I salty? Yes, I am. And I hope they actually go trophyless, and I hope they finish in the bottom half of the table. Of course, Barcelona swept them aside pretty easily. Not really much to take from this game for Barcelona. Only thing I took from this game, Rooney Bardghji is the truth. And it should be interesting to see how we line up against Real Madrid in the final, who beat Atletico Madrid again. This whole narrative that Atletico Madrid versus Real Madrid is a rivalry, I don't really understand it. Real Madrid always beats Atletico Madrid whenever it actually matters. If it's a game that actually matters, they always beat them. If it's a La Liga decider, they beat them. If it's a Champions League quarterfinal, they beat them. If it's they beat them. The only times Atletico Madrid beat Real Madrid is in the Copa del Rey and in a meaningless La Liga game that ends up meaning nothing because they finished third regardless. Diego Simeone needs to leave this football club. I look at the amount of players in their side, and I think you are bang average. Giuliano Simeone, bang average. Sorloth, bang average. Koke, I'm still seeing Koke Resurrection in big 2026. In big 2026. This game they played out 2-1. Real Madrid, goals from Rodrigo and Fede Valverde. What a strike from Valverde. Real Madrid were so average in this game. Genuinely. Bellingham was fantastic in the first half. I thought Tchouaméni and Camavinga, for me, Camavinga, I'll continue saying it, is the solution to their high-tempo midfielder that they need in the midfield. A player who gets on the ball, keeps it going, has a lot of touches, keeps the game tipping. That is the player they need. But his injury record is all over the place. Bellingham, as I said, was fantastic. Vinicius, once again, anonymous. Rodrigo, anonymous until he scored. Gonzalo Garcia, anonymous. Atletico Madrid got into so many good places, had a lot of half chances. But as I said, when you have bang average players, they're not really going to make the most of those chances. Diego Simeone needs to leave this football club. Let them move forward. Let them try something new. Let them integrate something else. Do something else. Because this is clearly not working. They will ultimately finish third in La Liga again. They will probably get to the round of 16 of the Champions League and get knocked out. They will probably get knocked out in the quarterfinals of the Copa del Rey, as they do every year. And they'll do the cycle all over again next season. Just keep it, let it go. But as I said, an El Clasico final in the Super Cup, Should be interesting to see. I will be making a video on that, whether Barcelona win or not. Do I think we will win? To be honest, I don't even know. I genuinely don't know with Barcelona. The way we are right now, we're kind of all over the place. The attack, you look at the game against Bilbao and you're kind of excited. You feel rejuvenated. But then, again, Bilbao are terrible. La Liga is in a terrible state right now. The teams who are good in La Liga are actually really bad. So really and truly, I'm not going to take too much away from that game. Defensively, we're still very, very open. I'm looking at, but then, of course, Real Madrid don't have Kylian Mbappe. And he's probably the only player I look at that I'm really scared about. In the midfield, I think we'll be fine. But if they do play a midfield of Bellingham, Tchouaméni, and Camavinga, which I do expect, I think it will be tricky for us. We're going to need the best level from Pedri, which you see every week. We're going to need a high level from Frenkie de Jong, who's come under a lot of criticism recently. And you're going to need a high level from whoever plays between Firmino or Olmo. Please, Hansi Flick, do not play Rafinha in the number 10. Thank you very much. But ultimately, as I said, it's been a great week of football. Great week of football. Let me know what you guys think about all the games that I talked about. I don't think I'll ever talk about this many games in another video ever again. So enjoy it while it lasts. Take care.